right, hello everybody. I hope you're ready to continue working with me, to continue learning with me and with the other professors. Once again, here we are in our course to learn about this important language. We have seen in our course that English can be used in different contexts, in different areas. And we have also learned that communication has important components. We have learned that, for example, whenever you want to say something, you have different structures. You have a very strong linguistic component. We have also seen that whatever we say depends on the person we have in front of us. Is that person our boss? Is that person a doctor? Is he a police officer? And is that person maybe a colleague of you? But that colleague maybe is at home, and at home he might be your friend. But maybe he is at university where you work, or he is in another workplace, or in a different context. And in that case, what language do you activate? Just remember that also when we have, let's say, another culture, there are certain elements to take into account. And in today's lesson, we are going to dedicate some time to that important element or component about communication, and that is, what do you say when you forget something? What happens when there is a breakdown in communication? What do you do in that case? When you want to say a message, do you go like, do you stop the conversation? Or do you, let's say, use a way out? Do you use strategies? I'm sure you do, don't you? So it is time in today's lesson to work on different strategies we use to improve communication. Let's take a look at the screen and analyze the slide with information in regards to the main objectives of this lesson. Well, we're going to learn in today's lesson how to correct yourself. What happens when you say something wrong? You didn't want to say that. Now, what do you say? How do you improve that? Maybe it was something that you said and it was very harsh. And we're going to be working on socio-affective and compensation strategies. So what do you say in a nicer way? Sometimes we use expressions that are too harsh on people, and sometimes we might lose a message in let's say, communication. So, the first objective that we're going to work on in today's lesson is how to correct yourself. And as I was explaining at the beginning, you said something, especially in speaking, because when you write, you erase a message and maybe nothing happens because you have the chance to, let's say, erase it and write it again. But what happens is that when you're speaking, which is one of the 4 basic abilities of the language, and you say something, that is very hard because it is spontaneous and a productive ability. And from a neuropsychological viewpoint, you are activating there some factors that make it very difficult. So sometimes you say something, and how do you solve that problem on the spot? So that's why I think it is very important to activate your strategies on, let's say, or when you're using your speaking skills. So let's analyze one first situation in today's lesson and see what happens in this conversation. Let's take a look at the slide. So let's analyze this dialogue and identify the strategy used by the student to correct himself. It is a conversation between 2 students. And student number 1 says, I never learned anything in school. So student 2 wants him to realize what he has just said. Come on, you're going to school. Well, he says, well, do you really mean that? And the answer by student 1 is, well, what I mean is I don't think I learned very much. Maybe from 1 or 2 teachers. So what is the strategy used over there to correct what he has just said? I never learned anything in school. Do you really mean that? And then he says, well, What I mean is, I don't think I learned very much. He gives an explanation, but preceded by a very useful expression. That is, what I mean is, okay? So that will be the expression we use in that case, in this conversation, to correct something that you are saying. So once again, correcting yourself is a very important meaning. So what do you say? Okay? So, I hope that you realize what is happening here. We're just trying to improve our communication. And for that purpose, we're going to have the possibility to analyze other strategies. All right, so there we go. What other expressions do you use to correct yourself? What I mean is that, and the verb means here is lo que quiero decir, lo que quiero expresar. What I meant was, if you want to make reference to something you said in the past, you can also use that expression. Let me put it another way. What I'm saying, and careful with the pronunciation of these verbs, saying. You have say, y. What I'm saying is, let's continue. What I'm trying to say is very similar to saying, trying, saying. Don't misunderstand me. No me malinterprete. Don't misunderstand me. You can also say, very similar to this one, don't get me wrong. Do not misunderstand me and don't get me wrong are similar expressions. If I say that, I didn't mean to. Si dije eso, realmente no fue mi intención. And you can also say, let me rephrase what I just said. I'm going to give you some seconds to copy because I know these will be very useful expressions. Come on, take your time. Tómense su tiempo y copien estas estrategias, estas expresiones para ser más estratégicos en la comunicación. Les voy a dar unos segundos. Go ahead. Okay, so remember what happens. What do we do when we make a mistake in communication? Sometimes we say something that we shouldn't have, and it happens. We're all the time moderating, we're all the time modulating what we're saying. We're human beings. We make mistakes, right? But you can fix that if you use some expressions. So correcting yourself is a very important strategy, especially when you activate or when you're talking, when you're using your speaking abilities. So we are going to have a first activity now in which you're going to practice this, let's say, ability, strategy in communication. Let's take a look at the slide and see how we can improve our communication. And we have our first exercise. So moderate the following extreme phrases said by other people. Extreme phrases, right? So things that you shouldn't have said, and maybe people might misunderstand, and they might not sound nice or polite. Number one, I can't stand dancing. I can't stand is an expression we use to say that you don't like something at all. I can't stand. No soporto. Bailar. So this person doesn't like dancing at all. Number two, I would never live in Australia. What would people think if you say that? I would never live in Australia. Number three, students in my class are lazy. So they don't like to work. They are lazy. Number four, I never have to look up a word in the dictionary. Who would say that? Do you think the person is showing off? Is the person showing off? La persona que está diciendo eso está como siendo un poco arrogante. ¿Conocen ese verbo? Show off. To show off es un verbo que se utiliza cuando decimos que la persona está siendo arrogante. So, I never have to look up a word in the dictionary. Yo nunca tengo que buscar ninguna palabra en el diccionario. ¿Usted diría eso? Puede ser que la persona lo esté malinterpretando. To show off, ser arrogante, vanagloriarse de algo, to show off, to boast, to brag. There are many ways to say that. Don't be arrogant, but maybe you don't want to be arrogant. You're just, let's say, saying something and the person might react, but let's see how you can solve that. Number five, I hate to learn foreign languages. I hate to learn foreign languages. So take your time to copy these expressions. Just remember that some of these meanings we have worked in class. To look up a word in the dictionary es cuando uno dice que va a buscar algo en el diccionario. Una de las clases que hemos dado, trabajamos los significados de frases verbales con una implicación idiomática. So look up a word in the dictionary. Buscar algo en el diccionario. Y bueno, les voy a dar algunos segundos para que puedan copiar esas expresiones y además les voy a dar tiempo, ¿no?, para que ustedes piensen cómo yo puedo arreglar eso teniendo en cuenta las expresiones que vimos al principio. So how can you improve that? Remember, you have some expressions I gave you before this slide. Expressions like, let me put that in another way. That's not what I meant. Well, you know. So take your time and try to fix it. Later, I'm going to show you the possibilities that I used. Take your time. You can't stand dancing. Maybe you say that in a specific context and people don't like it. You see their reaction. We're going to have the possibility to analyze gestures in our course. So people don't like what you're saying. I can't stand dancing. It might sound disrespectful. Maybe people who like salsa, or expressions like, I never have to look up a word in the dictionary. Are you showing off? People might misunderstand you. So what would you say? How would you, let's say, reorganize or do something to fix what you have just said? So right now, I have one suggestion. Let's analyze the proposals I gave you, and I am sure you have others. So let's see how we can give some answers to that we have just said. I can't stand dancing. Let me put it another way. I don't like it so much because I can't dance that well. Let me put it another way. That is, in red we have the strategies to correct yourself. You don't want to sound impolite. Next, I would never live in Australia. So what would our friends from Australia think? You don't like that place? You might be disrespectful, and that's not what we want to say. I would never live in Australia. Don't get me wrong. I just don't like the hot weather there. Australia is a beautiful place, my friends. Number 3, students in my class are lazy. Sería muy feo referirse a los amigos como que son vagos, ¿no? Let me rephrase what I just said. They don't do what they are supposed to. So you're just being nicer, right? Maybe, yeah, they should do something. I would give them advice, but be careful because the words you use might be painful to people, right? The language you use is something that might hurt. It might be a dangerous weapon. So let's be nice. Let's analyze the other slide with the other possibilities. I never have to look up a word in the dictionary. Don't misunderstand me. I just use it as a last resource. Yo utilizo el diccionario en última instancia. I use it as a last resource. So remember that sometimes you don't have the possibility to look up all the words in the dictionary. Maybe you're reading, right? Can you believe that? That every time you have a question about a word, you're looking up, and sometimes, as you will study with Professor Isora, inference is important in communication. So don't look up all the words, but sometimes it is necessary to use a dictionary. And this is what the person meant. I hate to learn foreign languages. I didn't mean to say that. It is just that I have a hard time learning them. I have a hard time learning them. Es que me da trabajo. Eso es una expresión utilizada cuando algo le es difícil a usted. I have a hard time learning them. Me da mucho trabajo aprenderlos. But that's not what I meant, right? I find it difficult to learn languages, right? So here we have a lot of resources. Correct yourself. Remember that I am here, but I have somebody else I'm talking to there. You're there, I'm here, right? So I think about everything I say, and sometimes I use strategies so you, my students, understand everything I'm saying. And if I maybe think that you're misunderstanding me, I say, let me rephrase that. Or I didn't mean to say that because people might believe that I'm sending the wrong message, and that is not what I want. So when we are communicating, we need to take this into account. Strategies, and one of them is correcting yourself. That's not a problem, but correct yourself. That's important. Do not, let's say, send the wrong message to other people. Now, when we're talking, we also have other strategies that we use not to be harsh on people. We use strategies to be more polite. We use strategies to be nicer. And for that reason, we will have now the possibility to analyze other strategies that are socio-affective. It's related to emotions, right? It's related to things we say or things we do with our body. So one of them is when we show interest. Take a look at the slide. Cooperation is one important principle. Espero que lo estemos analizando en pantalla, como en la diapositiva, como la cooperación es uno de estos significados. Cooperation. So one of the indicators to show that you're being cooperative is showing interest. And this is something we have seen in other lessons, right? Asking questions, let's say following the person's conversation. Keep eye contact. Remember, when you're talking, you should not give a person a wandering eye. No ponga el ojo hacia el lado o no mire en otra dirección que no sea esa de la cual la persona lo esté mirando, porque es un poco irrespetuoso. It is very disrespectful when you're doing that. Now, using euphemisms. What is this? This is a term to describe, let's say, that expression. It is an indirect expression that is substituted for one that is considered offensive or too harsh. Un eufemismo, decimos en español esas expresiones que utilizamos para no sonar muy directos, para realidades que son muy duras, llamarlos de otro nombre, llamarlos de otra manera. So, for example, we say Tom is short. Or you cannot tell Tom directly, hey, Tom, you're short. You're being too direct and you're being offensive. So what could you say to avoid that? Tom is not very tall. That is an example of euphemism. So one of the ways, as you can see there, of using euphemism is by adding not very and the opposite adjective. So these are a lot of, some of the strategies we use to sound nicer, to be more polite. A euphemism is one of them. And maybe you say here, well, euphemism begins with a vowel, the vowel E, right? And then I wrote A. How is that possible? A euphemism. Remember, when the word is pronounced, you, in the case of euphemism, you don't use N, you use A. That's why I wrote a euphemism. And, well, in general, it is so important, right, when we use them. So, once again, I think that it's important to remind you how necessary it is to use these expressions. Not only verbally, but also non-verbally. What gestures, the position of your sight, right, directly to the person. Are you too direct? You might hurt the other person's feelings. What do you say? Right? Do you keep eye contact when you're talking like this? I hope you do, right? Because that shows that you are a respectful person. You show respect for other people. You ask questions, and you're not, let's say, too direct in a conversation. So let's do another exercise. Let's do the second exercise in today's lesson. Take a look at the slide. In exercise number 2, you have to restate, you have to rewrite the following sentences by using not very and the opposite of the adjective, the antonym of the adjective. These are sentences that might be too direct. Mark's apartment is small. You don't say that. You have to be careful when it comes to aesthetic elements. You don't talk about a person's house like that, at least not in a few contexts. So you just be careful. Paul and Sue are are stingy. And the meaning of stingy is, well, I'm not going to tell you the meaning. Maybe if I give you the opposite, because you need the opposite. Paul and Sue are stingy. Stingy, the opposite is generous. Stingy, generous. Generoso y tacaña, ¿verdad? Una persona que, en este caso, le estamos diciendo directamente a Paul y Sue que son tacaños, ¿no? Que no comparten muchas de las cosas que tienen. Aún así, aunque no compartan, usted no debe ser, digamos, tan directo y decir que ellos son unos tacaños. Vamos a decirlo de otra manera. Vamos a decirlo más bonito. Paul and Sue are stingy. Number 3, this lesson is boring. So boring, I hope you have an opposite, an antonym for boring. Yes, that's right, interesting. This lesson is boring. I hope this lesson is not boring. You let me know, right? If it is, I'm going to change, I promise. Number 4, their children are rude. Their children are rude. And rude is a false cognate. The word rude might look like rudo en español, pero no tiene nada que ver con lo que usted se piensa. Rude means grosero. Los niños de alguien son groseros y usted no se lo dice. Se imagina cómo se puede poner ese padre, esa madre, si usted le dice que los niños son groseros. En fin, no se le dice a nadie. Their children are rude. Estamos diciendo directamente que sus niños son groseros. Vamos a ver cómo podríamos mejorar eso. Rude. ¿Y cómo yo utilizaría? ¿Qué antónimo yo podría buscar para rude? Rude, polite. Okay, that's great. So rude, polite. And finally, number 5, John looks miserable. And the meaning of miserable is unhappy. So John looks miserable. So the opposite of miserable is happy. Miserable here doesn't mean that the person doesn't have a cent or has other problems. Miserable means unhappy. So if you think about miserable and unhappy as synonyms, an antonym is happy. So just remember, for small, the opposite would be big. Stingy, generous, boring, interesting, rude, polite, and miserable, happy. Okay, so remember that in this exercise you have to use the combination of not very plus the adjective. I will give you some seconds so you can copy and you can rewrite these sentences that might sound harsh to people, might sound too direct. Take your time, copy, and do the exercise. Go ahead. Okay, so remember that we are working on, let's say, the use of euphemisms to avoid, let's say, being too direct or harsh to people. And I gave you the possibility to work on, let's say, improving that message. So remember using that by using not very plus the opposite of that, you can, let's say, make it better. So let's check. Okay, so number one, Mark's apartment is not very big. Number two, Paul and Sue are not very generous. Generous. And be careful with the pronunciation of this ending. Some people don't or have a hard time pronouncing this. Generous, right? It is a very weak sound. Generous. Let's see at home. Generous. 3. This lesson is not very interesting. Number 4, their children are not very polite. Their children are not very polite. They're not very nice. And number 5, John doesn't look very happy. Because if you say miserable, you're being too direct, too harsh. Okay? So I hope that you are, let's say, learning that when it comes to communication, you have to be careful because you might hurt others' feelings, as we have seen in today's lesson. So we are trying to improve communication in English, but don't forget in Spanish too. We need to be nice, we need to be polite in communication. And in many cultures, and this is necessary for communication, you cannot be so direct because you might be, let's say, violating their space and you might be harmful to these people and they might run away. They might not want to talk to you in the future anymore. And maybe you say, well, what did I say? And the problem is that you were too direct. You didn't use a nicer expression to get meaning across. And that is what happened. Maybe you didn't realize, but the person did. That is why it is so important to take into account all the components to be better communicators. Now, the lesson goes into another direction. And we continue working on strategies, but this time we're going to try to compensate or to learn how to use compensatory strategies, right? So what happens when your competence, your linguistic competence is hindered? What happens when you don't have a lot of words? What do you say? Let's take a look at the slide and analyze some of these strategies to compensate our linguistic components. Strategy number 1, called circumlocution. This prefix meaning to go around, and locution is what you say, is a sentence. So circumlocution described as, this moment when you, excuse me for the repetition, describing or exemplifying a certain reality whose name you don't remember. You're having a conversation and you tell that person, I don't know, you want to open a bottle of wine and you forgot how to say that object. That is a corkscrew. And maybe you ask that person that you're looking for the thing you used to open the bottle. So the word thing can be used. It's not a very nice, let's say, word to say all the time, but in this case, it is a strategy because you don't know. And of course, you learn it later. So corkscrew. Circumlocution. We do this a lot of the time. Not only because we don't know the word, sometimes we're even tired and we forget these words. So we use the word thing. The thing you use to open bottles, corkscrew. Another strategy we use in communication is approximation. And what happens is that we use an alternative term which expresses the meaning of a lexical item as closely as possible. For example, you use the word ship if you don't remember the term sailboat. You might go to general terms such as chair for swivel chair or deck chair. A swivel chair is this kind of chairs that you have in different offices and they move around. Swivel chair es ese tipo de silla que las personas tienen en las oficinas y que en esa misma silla usted puede darse la vuelta. ¿Qué término más específico? It's a very specific term, swivel chair. And you cannot know all the words, not even in Spanish, let alone in English, right? So you want to use maybe a general term. Chair, right, for a swivel chair. If you know the term, great. A swivel chair and a deck chair or a beach chair. Como decimos en español, esas sillas que las personas utilizan en la playa, una tumbona. Can you believe that? And you're on the beach and you're looking for that chair and you say, can I have that? What? That chair? Can I have that? It's very hard to say, to know all the words. Deck chair. So we use general terms for specific things. Maybe you want to take some time to copy these two strategies we use a lot in communication. Two of them in italics, circumlocution and approximation. Just copy the examples. Take some seconds. So remember, communication requires, strategies require, let's say, what comes out of your mouth. Verbal communication, circumlocution. You don't have the exact word, and you go around, right? You go around that message. You paraphrase, too, right? You don't know specific terms. Maybe you can use a more general term. And as a last resort, sometimes you use the word that thing, or that stuff you use for, of course, later, improve it. It doesn't mean that you're using strategies all the time, but they are very important. So verbal strategies. But what happens when you don't even have a lot of resources? You don't have a lot of words. You also use non-linguistic resources. right? Non-verbal, better. Non-verbal resources. Let's see on the next slide what things we can do when we don't even have, let's say, the words. Sometimes we use non-linguistic signals, like miming. A veces hacemos la mímica de la palabra, using gestures, facial expression, or sound imitation. Y esto le ha pasado a muchas personas que han ido a un país por primera vez. Historias de personas cubanos que han viajado al exterior y han querido en una cafetería o en algún lugar pedir un plato determinado y han tenido que, imagínense ustedes si va a pedir un pollo. A esa hora usted haciendo como el pollo, all right? O a lo mejor pintándolo, ¿no? En una hoja. ¿Se imagina? Bueno, yo sí conozco historias y me las han dicho y han sido muy graciosas. ¿Se imagina usted haciendo el sonido del animal? So non-linguistic signals. I want to eat. How would you do that? It takes arts, right? You're doing mimicry. You're miming. You're using gestures, facial expression. You're imitating sounds, all right? So I'm never sure how I would imitate an animal, but a lot of people have, right? So you want to eat some meat? How would you do that? Okay, so that is a non-linguistic element that you use. Another strategy that we use is the moment when we appeal for help. We ask for aid from the interlocutor directly, right? You're talking to a native speaker and you're learning the language and you say, what do you call? What do you call? Y fíjense que en esta expresión se utiliza what y no how, porque en español decimos cómo usted le dice a este objeto, ¿no? Que tengo en la mano. Por ejemplo, este marcador, yo le diría a usted, ¿y cómo usted le dice a esto, no? Si estoy aprendiendo, ¿cómo le dice? Como aprendemos todo, ¿no? Una lengua y queremos saber cómo denominar ese objeto. ¿Y cómo le dice? Y eso es en español, ¿cómo? Sin embargo, en inglés se utiliza la partícula what. Y la expresión sería, what do you call? Nunca how. Es importante recordar eso. So you talk to the person directly. What do you call? It can also be indirectly by using rising intonation, pause, eye contact, and puzzled expression. All right? Fíjense que puede ser directamente que yo te pregunte. A ver si me permite la cámara enseñarle cómo sería directamente. Si quiero, por ejemplo, saber directamente el significado de este marcador, yo estoy hablando con alguien y yo, por ejemplo, le preguntaría, what do you call this? Right? Con el plumón en la mano. What do you call it? Okay? What do you call this? And the person would say, oh, it's an eraser. How many times do you ask for help? You're talking to a foreigner and you say, what do you call this? Or what do you call this? An eraser. But sometimes you don't use an exact expression. Sometimes you are like, you're not very certain about the object and you say, well, I need a marker. Like I'm looking for approval, right? I need a marker. So the intonation rises. Or I need an eraser, right? And the look of my face is kind of a puzzle. Yo estoy como que confundido, ¿no? Pero estoy buscando esa aprobación de mi interlocutor con la entonación o mostrándole el objeto, subiendo la entonación. I'm looking for a marker. ¿Cuántas veces uno no va a la tienda, hasta en español, y dice, estoy buscando esta pastilla que se llama, y así con esa cara como que de confusión? You're puzzled. Your face is puzzled. So, as you can see, communication is about what you say, but also the gestures you use. It is important. But careful, because some gestures, as we will study in future lessons, some gestures might send the wrong message. A veces la gestualidad, y esto es algo que vamos a hacer en clase futura, como la gestualidad en diferentes contextos podría transmitir diferentes, o un mensaje diferente al que a lo mejor usted quiere transmitir en español, porque esto es algo que también es diferente. All right, so take your time to write down some of these elements to improve your strategies in the language. Les voy a dar algunos segundos para que copien o tomen alguna nota de estos elementos que acabamos de analizar. So, we're using a lot of strategies in today's lesson. And sometimes in communication there are things we don't understand. And some people like to use the word, like, for example, if you say, I went to school and you didn't understand, and some people say, what? But as we are analyzing in today's lesson, you want to be nicer. You want to be more polite. And good strategies to be more polite in English include different expressions, different questions, different words we use to ask for clarification. And this is another important communicative function in regards or related to, let's say, making strategies. Let's take a look at the next slide. So we ask a question for clarification when we want, that is asking for a repetition, paraphrasing, explanation, and or examples. So we can do that by asking the person, for example, in the presence of numbers like 13 and 30, if you're not very sure, you say, did you say 13 or 30? Especially in an address. Can you believe that? That you tell the taxi driver 13 and then he takes you to a different direction? Or money or age, right? Did you say 13 or 30? And intonation goes up, 13 or 30. Right? So I'm giving you two possibilities here, and I want you to repeat, 13 or 30. Another one is, I'm afraid I don't understand. Could you say that in other words? Look how nice we are being when we say, could you say? Could you say that in other words? Could you repeat, please? Could you say that again? There are many other variants we can use with the expression, could you say? One that is very useful is the other one. I beg your pardon, or pardon, or pardon me. This is very polite. I beg your pardon, pardon me. And another one is, what do you mean by that? ¿Qué usted quiere decir con eso, no? Que me está expresando. What do you mean by that? So all these expressions are lovely. They are nice. Use them, please. I'm sure this will make you a better let's say, communicator. Take some time to copy, and we're coming back in a few seconds with more strategies. Go ahead.
Strange thoughts staring
right. So would you like to go on? What strategies do you use, for example, when you want to have more time? What expressions do you use, right? For example, now I'm working with you on television, and sometimes I use expressions to stall time, to gain some time, and we use that as well in real life. Let's see what happens, what other strategies we can use when we want to gain time. So they are called stalling or time gaining strategies. Estrategias que utilizamos para ganar en tiempo, para demorar un tiempo determinado. We use fillers or hesitation devices to fill pauses to gain time to think. For example, we can use, well, now let's see. Remember, you want to gain time. Let's see. Let me think. I could go on and on with different examples. But I just want you to get familiar with this expression. You can use more, of course. All right, so very briefly, we're going to something else that I would like to check with you. Vamos rapidito a analizar alguna de las últimas estrategias que le propongo, que está en relación con ese momento donde a veces, sobre todo nos pasa a los que estamos aprendiendo una lengua extranjera. Usted está, digamos, en la unidad de intercambio de información personal y digamos que ya usted quiere expresar acciones en el pasado o usted quiere expresar, digamos, significados como el arrepentimiento, cuyas estructuras llevan, digamos, un grupo de complicaciones, disculpen la repetición, estructurales. O sea, si usted va a decir, por ejemplo, si yo hubiese sido tú, yo no habría hecho eso. O sea, ¿cómo a usted se le ocurre, digamos, utilizar esa expresión si usted lo que está es aprendiendo a intercambiar información personal? So what do you do? Very briefly. Y vamos rapidito a ver cómo se llaman esas estrategias. They are called avoidance strategies. Estrategias de evitamiento. Usted no quiere, digamos, en ese caso, a lo mejor es un mensaje que usted quería expresar y tiene que abandonarlo. Mire, no entre ahí, no lo diga, porque usted no cuenta con esas estructuras. Compense sus limitaciones lingüísticas. All right, so that is one example. I lost my road. He wanted to say, I lost my way. And the other person said, you lost your road? I got lost. Fíjense que salió rápido de ahí porque él no quería, digamos, entrar en un, trató de evitar ese mensaje en todo momento. All right? So in today's lesson, we have the possibility to learn about this component, strategic component in the language. So I hope that you enjoyed this lesson as I have, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
You